Good afternoon, one and all, and welcome back to the next session of the conference. Last couple of days provided us with the opportunity to discuss and deliberate on the importance of responsible management practices in this competitive and globalized economy. Various topics of relevance such as framework for responsible management education, importance of CSR and ethics in business were also touched upon. I'm sure these discussions have provided us deeper insights on responsible management practices. We now move on to the next pertinent topic, sustainable businesses key to responsible management practice. The concept of sustainability in business has brought in a paradigm shift in the management practices. The underlying concept of sustainability is the notion that organizations need to focus on the value they add in the environmental and social areas in addition to focus in profit. Hence, the need of the hour is to move from conventional profit-only model to people, planet, and profit model. This session focuses on how corporates implement the triple bottom line into practice. Today we have with us eminent academicians and practitioners as our panelists to enlighten us on the topic. The discussion will be centered around the challenges and major strategic issues in balancing 3 Ps and how a firm incorporates the responsible management practices in various functional areas like operations, supply chain, R&D, and marketing. The speakers will also touch upon viability of sustainable business model in emerging markets like India. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. T.L. Raghuram, Professor of Strategy, XLRI Jamshedpur. Dr. Raghuram has been in academics for over 16 years and has worked with IIM Calcutta, Wildlife Institute of India, and Indira Gandhi Institute of Development and Research, Mumbai. He was a Fulbright Environment Leadership Fellow at Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University. His work explores environmental governance, policy, development, and environment interface. He is now a consultant to the Ministry of Environment and Forest, Government of India, to evaluate community forest institutions. Sir, I welcome you to the session. Our next panelist is Dr. Edla Singh, Secretary General, Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Dr. Singh, an ISF officer, took over as Secretary General of FICCI from November 2012. He retired as Secretary to Government of India in Ministry of Overseas Indian Affairs. Prior to this, he served as a member, National Highways Authority of India, and Joint Secretary in the Ministry of Heavy Industries. Dr. Singh is an internationally known expert in e-commerce and has 3 books and several publications to his credit. So I welcome you to this session, sir. Mr. Thomas Chandy is the Executive Officer of the Save the Children India. Under his leadership, Save the Children India has rapidly expanded the scale and scope of its programs, advocacy, and fundraising operations to become stronger member of Save the Children International with a presence in 14 states across the country. Prior to joining the development sector, Mr. Thomas took on various senior roles with Coca-Cola India. He also serves on the boards of several non-profit organizations. So I welcome you to the session, sir. We have 2 research paper presentations for this session. The first one is by Mr. Deepak Malik. Mr. Deepak Malik is a corporate member and chartered engineer from the Institution of Engineers, India. He is also a member of Environmental Committee of Indian Road Congress. I welcome Mr. Malik to this conference. Ms. Rajkumari Mittal will be presenting her paper, Redrafting the Growth Strategies for Greening the Supply Chain and Indian Perspective. Ms. Mittal is a faculty of IILM in the area of operations. I once again welcome you all to the session. Now I request Dr. Raghuram to chair the session and moderate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good morning. Normally I avoid chairing sessions and normally try to delegate that to a senior member on the panel, but now I am put into this position. I welcome my co-panelists onto this, and I'm supposed to talk first, but what I decided is I'll request my esteemed colleagues, Dr. Singh, to take up and give his presentation, and I'll come towards the end after everyone is done. Now I want to give more time to my co-panelists, and if there is time towards the end, I'll try to cover that aspect. Dr. Deepak Singh, please say it.
It's probably easier than
Morning. I believe it's the third day today, so there must be a lot of fatigue setting in. But that's part of management practice, so you better get used to it if you're going to be working in the corporate. It's a 24-hour-by-7 job. I was given 3 questions or 3 premises to respond to, and that's what I'm going to do. I don't have a presentation because I believe this is not a lecture, and I hope that we'll be able to get some views on the other side of the table as we go along. The first premise I was given was, does a consumption-driven economy inherently conflict with a sustainable economy? Question 1. Question 2, what does responsible growth look like in emerging markets like India? And 3, should businesses follow the consumption pattern of the advanced economies, or should businesses shape responsible or sustainable consumption behavior? Interesting questions. I have a certain take on this. When you talk of consumption-driven economy, it sounds like a cliche, but basically what you're saying is market economy. There is no other economy. We don't work in different vertical or different parts of our economy around the world. Let's be very sure about it. The 100+ democracies in the world basically work in a market economy. And in fact, if you look at even the other countries around the world, the global compact, so to speak, has almost become singular in nature. It is essentially a market economy which is working around the world. Is it consumption driven? Of course it's consumption driven. But it's a consumption driven which is part of a larger context of an economic environment, which we all know, and you study it in your lectures all the time. It's all about demand and supply. That's all what makes for business, and that's what makes for market economy. Whether you do resources, or whether you do production, or whether you do services that you're going to supply in that economy. To put it more bluntly, we are actually part of a capitalist economy. Though we don't openly speak about it too often, that's what the reality is. In capitalism itself, there is a change, and there has been a change which has been coming about for several years. In fact, some of you might, those of you who studied it may recall there was something called progressive capitalism, which came in the 30s. Today we call it inclusive growth. It sounds very nice to talk about inclusive growth. Inclusive growth basically means what? You're basically saying that if your growth is going to be sustainable, it better be inclusive. Because if it's not, then you lose the market. It's plain and simple economics. They talked about it as progressive capitalism way back in the 30s. Of course, there it was more of a philanthropic context. That because capitalism is now growing in the US, you need to take care of people who are at the bottom of the pyramid, and therefore be progressive in the way you react. In India too, we are all aware of it. Philanthropy has been very much part of the psyche of Indian business, and let us say even feudalism in a context had philanthropy as part of it. This was part of a structure of government and a structure of governance, so to speak, by which society would be able to deliver to those which are not so well in their economic and social well-being, and therefore need to be taken care of. So when you say, does a consumption-driven economy inherently conflict with a sustainable economy? My answer is no. It doesn't. It's the same thing. A consumption-driven economy is what the market is. To make that market sustainable, you need to have sustainable business. It's as simple as that. We could go into the details of it, but basically what we are trying to say is that Indian business also, and I speak on behalf of a major federation of Indian business, it's been part of so much of the work and so much of the research, so much of the actual on-ground reality of what we refer to as corporate governance. And when we say corporate governance, what we imply is a governance which again cannot be in a compartment. In fact, we in FICCI run a special council which we refer to as the Inclusive Governance Council. The logic is that all of governance is actually singular. You cannot have corporate governance on its own. You cannot have government governance on its own. You cannot have NGOs governance on its own. They're all integrated into one. And to be able to do real corporate governance, you have to have actually governance on the ground. You have to have good governance which leads to good business, which leads to good socio-economic development for the country as a whole. And if you look at even the way the government of India has reacted to it, you will see that over the years, a very large number of laws and a large number of actual, let us say, initiatives from Parliament and then on to government itself have been taken over the years, basically looking to see how do you bring aspects of better governance into play. And when we say better governance, we mean it across the board, from e-governance at the one end, where you have IT being utilized for being more transparency, more openness, more automaticity in the functionings of government. And you also mean at the same time handling the single largest issue which all of us confront on a daily basis, which is corruption. Corruption is another aspect of nothing less but governance. And the same corruption impacts business as it does anybody else. And when we talk in terms of better corporate governance practices, we are only addressing one part of that whole which needs to address the issue of corruption across the country. Now you have on the one hand the Companies Bill. We all know that we've just passed it as a Companies Act. This is a major initiative that has converted into law good practices of corporate governance which have become mandatory now. It's not that they weren't there before, no, it's mandatory in many senses. You have, as you know, in India we had passed several years ago the Right to Information Act. What is that? It's nothing but to be able to question governance. And why do you want to question governance? Because you want to make it sustainable. Because unless you question it, unless you ensure that what is happening in terms of the practices of both government as well as corporates, you are not going to have a sustainable system that you can actually work at. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that it's very much part of business psyche. It's not something outside. So when you as young students of management, please don't think that you're learning something special that you have to bring in. It's not. It's something which is part of the psyche of any corporate and has to be. Because if it's not, then you're not part of the system of what we call modern corporate governance or what we call modern business practices. It is very much part of it. You can treat it as something which is philanthropy or you can treat it as something which is CSR, but at the end of the day, when you're doing practices which are sustainable, not just for you as a business, but for society in which you're functioning, these two are interconnected activities. And it's these interconnected activities that make them, in fact, by that interconnection, the activities themselves become sustainable. It's a bit of semantics in here, but try and understand the whole that I'm trying to convey at this point. That we should not perceive that corporates in some way are a different entity in an economic system. And NGOs are a different entity, and government is a different entity, and education is a different entity. They're not. They're all part of the same market economy. They're all part of the same governance system in every way, because it impacts our lives on a daily basis. And that is what we need to understand. We could dwell in various aspects of the several laws and that have come in, but I'll just end with one very, let us say again a context of again a law which has come into place, which is the Companies Act, which has now made it mandatory, as you all know, for 2% of the last 3 years' profits to be given as CSR activity by every corporate. Many corporates, incidentally, and Vicky also, we've made this point, that actually it's a tax. You're putting a 2% tax on corporates to say that they have to do 2% of their profits into CSR activity. But if you look at it from the holistic view that I'm trying to convey to you, actually it is part of a system that corporates are already doing. You're just quantifying it now. Government has said that these are 9 areas in which you should work, and those 9 areas basically are meant to to connect you and meant to make you do work in your local communities, that part of your work is part of the responsibility of being sustainable. Because unless you take care of the community around you, you are not going to be able to get that connect within that same socio-economic environment to be able to do good business. So actually at the end of the day, it enhances your own profitability and the functioning of your own corporate business world. India has been one of the first few countries in the world to actually say this, and we should be very proud of it, that we have a CSR stipulation like this in the Companies Act. I think we are the 12th or 13th country in the world which has actually made it mandatory in this manner. It's a remarkable thing that the country has done. And it links up to what we refer to as inclusive governance. And India was the first country to talk about inclusive governance. The whole world is talking about it now. The UN talks about it now. The Davos talks about it now. Bao Forum talks about it now. Inclusive governance, which I'm linking back to the very same context that I mentioned of progressive capitalism, which links into the fact that for sustainability, it is essential and mandatory for you to be able to do it in your day-to-day functioning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for so succinctly saying that if growth is to be sustainable, it better be inclusive. I think that single statement sums up what we have been, we have all been talking for the past 2 days. Now I invite Mr. Thomas Chandy to give a different perspective from an organization that has been working wonderfully well for the children of this country and many other parts of the world.
Thank you, Professor Raghuram, and all the other distinguished members sitting at this dais. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I used to work for the Coca-Cola company, and you can't get more consumeristic and consumption-oriented and capitalistic than that. And currently I'm with Save the Children, and you can't get more non-profit and non-capitalistic than that. So I think I just have seen and experienced both sides of the world, and as Mr. Didar Singh said, don't consider them as different parts. We are all a part of the same ecosystem or market economy in one sense. I'm going to draw a lot from the UNGC report. And first of all, before doing that, let me congratulate IILM for being inducted into the UNGC system, as well as being a champion for PRME. As I'm told that you're one of the 25 institutions around the world that is doing this. Save the Children also works closely with UNGC as well as with UNICEF. We brought out a report last year. We launched it in India, in Delhi and in Mumbai, and it is called the Child Rights and Business Principles. What are, when business is conducted, how do you incorporate some of the child rights into it? And UNGC itself is based on 4 planks, and human rights and child labor and environment are parts of that. And under the labor, definitely child labor is an important issue that they deal with. UNGC's report of 2013, it is supposed to be the largest ever produced report on the issue of sustainability, business sustainability. They actually had about 1,000 CEOs inputting into it, 75 CEOs giving in-depth interviews, happened around 100 countries. So it's a huge, humongous report. And it is on sustainable development and business. And the first report was in 2007, the second in 2010, and the third report, which just came in September 2013. What is of concern is that, what started off as very interesting with a lot of enthusiasm and zeal and spirit. I'm not saying that the enthusiasm is lost, but somewhere there are certain caution areas that this report brings up. In 2007, when they started, many of the CEOs said that sustainable development, and you also, Mr. Didar Singh mentioned about inclusive development, and it is very much the same thing, will actually lead to better business, will give you a competitive edge, and the world will be a better place. And when they started off, it really looked like it was growing very fast. And 2010, they said that we are going to reach that summit soon, where there would be sustainable development, where businesses would in fact take care of the social and setup around it, as well as the environment in which it is doing its business. 2013 report, however, says that optimism is in the suppressed economic climate, that optimism is not looking that great. That report says that the corporates are finding it difficult to find a business connect or a business case for sustainable development, if you will. There is frustrated ambition with the CEOs. It has reached a certain plateau, as a plateau of ambition. So where do we go from here? And 67% of the CEOs, and it really applies to India as well. Among these 1,000 CEOs, there are CEOs from Tata companies, there are CEOs from Mahindra Group, Birla Group, and other CEOs are also present. So this is a report that is applicable to India as well. And in that, the CEOs themselves, most of them, that is what I'm saying, 67% of them said that business is actually off the track, and we are not sure if sustainable development will happen the way we envisaged it a few years back. And the CEOs who were interviewed, they said top among their priority were growth and employment. Then came education, then came energy, then came environment, and bottom of the list was poverty reduction, health, etc. In fact, there were only 16% of that group thought that poverty reduction should be a part of the, should be among the first three priorities. So that being the scene, I mean, what is happening in India? It's interesting to see that we got the 2% rule, that net profit up to 2% should be spent on the social sector, should be spent on issues that would lead to sustainable development. And if India, historically, if you look at it, as we heard that India has been giving, and we all give, and Indians do give a lot. I mean, when they started giving, it used to be for religious causes, etc. However, if you really look at the CAF index of giving, India stands 136 among about 174 countries that were ranked. We are 136, kind of not really something which is complimentary for a country of our size, which is economic growth we've been proud of in the last 10 years, so, or more than 10 years, though it has got some dent this year. And also, if you look at the Indian giving, however, in the last 5 to 6 years, if you read reports, the most of Indian charity giving has been actually been by the government. 65% has been by the government, and 25% has been by foreign institutions. It could be bilateral, multilateral institutions, and 10% came from Indian corporates and Indian individuals. There were only 10% that came from corporates. We know that that is changing. We know from Save the Children's own experience, one of the most successful fundraising experience in India has been with the Indian middle class. We've been able to get in the last 3 years about 250,000 people regularly giving. Now 250,000 may sound like a large number, but then that is from a number of, I mean, anybody's guess, 200 million, 300 million consuming class, those people who can afford. So there is still a large number out there. That number is increasing, like the rest of the world. If you really look like UK, US and the rest of the world, of the giving between corporates and individuals actually is about 80% of that total giving pie, if you remove the government from it, between corporates and individuals. And that is not the case, but India is showing some trends towards that. So having stated that there is a global kind of dullness around sustainable development, there is a frustration of ambition, and many corporates that they started off, got into this pilot paralysis, at which also civil society organizations get into. We go ahead and do pilots and go to town about our pilots, but when it comes to scaling up, you are unable to do that scaling up business. So there needs to be something done, and some of the recommendations this report talks about is that one needs to have a step change in ambition and action by the corporates. Understand the change and what is required. How do we build a business case? Because if you really look at, unless people find a business case for sustainable development, that there is at the end of it, it is going to benefit the corporates and the world at large, it's not going to help. And the current situation, it's showing some difference to that. The 2% bill in India, I think it's good. It's going to trigger that giving. There will be a lot more people, a lot more corporates would come into the giving ambit. But the worry is that will that 2% also become like a statutory taxable element and just give it away to somebody and forget about sustainable development? Sustainable development would mean more than just giving away and forgetting about it. It is getting involved with the communities. It is understanding what the issues are. And I strongly believe that if you have to eradicate poverty, I strongly believe, because there are a lot of economists that believe in it, the countries that have developed fast in the last, and we have this formation of the BRICS group. Again, the group is going through a big dent at this point of time, economically itself and growth itself. But when these economics took off, including China and India, what has also happened is that inequity has also improved, has also increased. The Gini coefficient, which is a measure of the inequity, has actually gone up in India, has actually gone up in Brazil. South Africa is supposed to be the country with the biggest inequity. And even in countries like America, we talk about the rise of the plutocrats, the oligarchs in Russia, the top 1%. So the inequity is not really helping the poor. There was an article last year in one of the economist issues, which they said that the end of poverty by 2030. What kind of stood as a stumbling block between reaching that number was, I do think, and I was happy to see a report in Economic Times, in New York Times, which talked about whether aid has helped at all, because everybody has been saying that aid has been a complete failure. But this article really points out that how aid has really changed the situation, and there is also a special mention of Save the Children. That's why it got stuck in my mind. NGOs have a legitimate space. We need to work together with the corporates in working towards a sustainable development. We need to work with the government, and unless the government is the biggest player here in helping and in triggering and in facilitating policy changes and monitoring those policy changes, things are going to be difficult. So the government, the NGOs and the corporates, that the business itself would start finding value in the investment that they are making into the social sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chandy. All those numbers and your mention about Gini coefficient are quite worrying, but 2% of CSR. But one concern that is there is if 2% of CSR spend means about 15 to 20,000 crores of flow into the economy. Does the social sector, NGOs and other social sector organizations, do they have the ability to absorb this in an accountable, transparent and effective manner? Or maybe we'll address that issue as we go along. Now I invite Mr. Deepak Malik to present his research paper.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank IILM for providing me this opportunity.
Friends, in asking questions. Please.
Thank you, Dr. Raghuram, to highlighting the strategic issues in implementing responsible management practices. I think now we have around 10-15 minutes for question and answers. The house is open now. Yeah, I think we have Professor Rajkishan Nayak.
Dr. this question is for you. This report, which you talked about, I was pretty interested with that last result that you talked about. The report, the Standard & Poor's report.
Yeah.
Companies which are adopting sustainable practices are doing the financial performances. So my question is this, it's more technical. Is it that the companies which are doing well financially are adopting sustainable practices? Is the causation that way or is the other way?
Okay. The chicken egg question, I don't think we have a firm answer on that, but it is true. Large companies seem to be adopting sustainability.
Just to make it clear, I'm just talking about, I just wanted
The
the empirical evidence.
Yeah. The empirical evidence, as you said, what is listed, the 50 companies that are there on the ESG 50 are all big companies. Okay, and they have deep pockets and they have been spending on sustainability issues. So with that sample size, it is difficult to affirmatively say, but the indication is that there is a relationship between these two. Those who have a better ESG performance are outperforming their competitors. But which is preceding what? We'll have to discuss it outside. Okay, the technical issues that are involved.
Is a question.
This question goes to Mr. Chandy. Given that you are talking about, or you were talking about your experience both in the corporate sector, but now presently with Save the Children, and the finding in the report that you are referring to a global compact, saying that only 15% of CEOs say they would be able to partner with NGOs at the present stage. From your perspective, and maybe with concrete examples here in India, can you give us examples of where Save the Children works with companies on specific projects and the challenges and maybe also the opportunities you see of how maybe the rate could go up if you talk about maybe some specific examples of how this cooperation between the two sides, NGO, corporations, could work.
Yeah. The report says that they don't find the value addition of the NGOs not that great. So it's only 15% who thinks that is great. In India, we do work with a large number of corporates, and it is very important for an organization to have a credibility. And one of the questions that Professor Raghuram asked was, if the 20,000 crores come into circulation, how are you going to make sure that NGOs will be accountable? Now, I will include that question also in this. I think one of the presumptions is that when you talk about NGOs, what comes to the mind of corporations or public or even sometimes academics is that they're very unprofessional. They don't account. They have huge overheads. I can tell you that for the social return that I'm talking for the civil society as a whole, social returns that we create, the efficiencies that we have, and again I can talk with a little bit of knowledge about having been in the corporate sector for 22 years, I can say that sometimes some of them are more efficient, some of the non-profit organizations more efficient than the corporates themselves. When I joined my current job from a corporate, I thought, some of the practices, some of the systems that we had were superior. I can easily say that that did happen. But now, does that hold good for 2 million or more NGOs that are registered in India? I don't think so. The problem is that the entry barrier to an NGO in India is there are much less barriers in terms of to register a society or a trust, and usually that happens during emergencies, disasters, and people get money and spend it. And I'm not saying that all of them are spent well. So there is an issue there. Now, coming to your specific question about our experience, we do work with large multinationals simply because we have a name. A brand is as important for an NGO as it is for a corporate. And we have a global reputation. Most of the companies that we are engaged with are companies, those are multinational companies that have got a sizable presence in India as well. Indian corporates, there are some of them, especially in the recent Orissa cyclone, as well as before that the Uttarakhand disaster. There were several Indian companies that have come, and again corporate bodies like CII has come forward and helped us. So that is also changing. I know it's a bit of a long answer to your question, but the fact is that NGOs in India definitely need to build our credibility, need to get our act together. But at the same time, my request to the corporates is that don't pressure us away, saying that they are inefficient without really giving opportunities to work with the corporates. Yes.
I'll just add to this debate because I think it's a very interesting, particularly the question that was raised there, that is it the question that was raised about the graph that the more sustainable practices type of companies do better in the market, and that therefore sustainability is good for business practices. That question of chicken and egg that you were referring to is the same as asking, does charity come, or does philanthropy come before you have money to give it? Or does philanthropy comes because you have money to give it. It's a similar kind of question. But when you look at the corporate world, the presumption is that you have surpluses. Because if you didn't have surpluses, you wouldn't be in the corporate world. You are generating some surplus, some profit to be able to sustain your business. In that, I'll just very quickly take you just for more so for the students here to understand what the professor was just mentioning a little earlier, the concept of shared value. You know, this is something that we at FICCI, at the Federation of Chambers of Commerce and Industry, have been saying, that government is treating the CSR concept as a tax rather than a shared value. And that's the problem. Because for it to be sustainable, it will have to be shared value. Otherwise it will not be. The same question that was pointed out by here, that is it just going to be that you give a little charity once and forget about it after that? The only way for it to be sustainable, if it's in some way part of your supply chain. Now that brings us back to the concept that you were talking about earlier. And here, the fabulous example was given of the mango tree and how it's a corporate. That's a wonderful philosophical position. But I'll just give a real life example. That many of our members in FICCI, for example, actually do shared value. And the most obvious one that you've all heard about is Nestle, which in Moga in Punjab, what it did was, and continues to do, was that it supplies across the board assistance to all the dairy farmers who then bring in the products which are used by Nestle. And there's no compulsion to bring them in. You may or you may not do it, but you'll get the vet services, you'll get cold chain provided for you, you'll get even loans given out to you. The same thing Pepsi did when they were doing for their their tomato ketchup, so the whole tomato farming thing. So many corporates have done that, linked their supply chain to the community that supplies to them, making it therefore sustainable for both ends of the spectrum. That is where CSR actually works. So what we've been saying is that these 9 items which government have outlined, if you pick some of them, for example, there's skills and education. So if you do skills and education for children or schools or institutes around you, which can then probably come and work with you, you are actually enhancing your own skills and therefore making the productivity of your corporation better. This is the kind of linkage which will ultimately be required to take sustainability, CSR, development, profit, all of them into one particular whole. And that's the only way it's going to work.
Can I give one example from our work area? IKEA, the world furniture company, works with us, and they started working with us much before they made a market entry into India. And globally, when they looked at their supply chain in terms of labor practices, they found that India was a huge business risk area due to the child labor. And they went through the supply chain, and then after working and making sure that audits, etc. are done to make sure that their suppliers do not employ children, then their board came to this understanding that it is now not in the supply chain. In the fields, cotton growing fields, they employ children, because in India 40% of the child labor is found in cotton growing areas and in agriculture. So they wanted to work with us to make child labor socially and culturally unacceptable. That was the objective. And we started working in the states of Gujarat and Maharashtra. And while we were doing that, we also did huge advocacy work around it with the government of India, with many other civil society players, so much so that the Cabinet of India made a decision last year to ban child labor across all forms of labor. Before that, some forms of labor were allowed, like for instance agriculture. So this is an area where really we were able to really advocate from ground evidence that this is actually not good for children to be in that labor. I mean, there were huge huge health issues that were happening to children, apart from the fact that they were not going to school. So working with that, here we also got a national legislation done. So that is another example of working with corporates, is being able to change things at a large scale, large level.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Dr. Pinve.
I think we are not having any questions from the students.
One last question.
No, actually from the students.
I would like to give them an opportunity and grill the panelists.
I think we have Synergy.
So how to access the firm's actual sustainability? If the firm is genuinely doing something for the business sustainability, or it's just a marketing advantage that it's creating?
If a firm or a company tries to use sustainability as a short-term PR exercise or to gain a few brownie points in the short term, I think it will hit them back in a very in a very big way. So the companies have to be extremely cautious about how they approach sustainability and how they use sustainability for their intangible value creation. If they try to short term or use say greenwashing, claim that their products are green if they are not, all these things will come back to them. The stakeholders are extremely informed these ways, and their public media is very critical role is being played by it. So companies have to be very cautious in that.
Can I supplement to that?
Yes.
To what the student was asking. Coke in Canada was accused of groundwater depletion. They tried to do charity there and revive that particular area, therefore a marketing exercise. IKEA worldwide, not in India, outside India, has been accused of child labor irregularities. They have, on the other hand, championed. You take the case of ITC in tobacco, where they tried to do in areas of health where it has affected the smokers. So I think case after case, and Mr. Didar Singh also talked about shared value. So I would perhaps agree more with the student, because I mean, if you take example by example, there's been a number of examples where I think it has perhaps not been shared value.
No, that's why I did not take a corporate example when I talked about shared value is the precise reason. Nestle might be doing a wonderful job in Moga, but there are also accusations on that company about how they source their palm oil and water and various other issues. So a single company may not epitomize the true shared value creation as of now. But one good thing is companies are moving on that path. Some are far ahead, many of them are trying to catch up. So sustainability is a long march. There are no shortcuts to that. Everyone has to realize and see value in sustainability for each company and each individual. Now, sustainability is not only for the corporate world, it applies to equally for individuals also. What is our individual ecological footprint? So that's why I have taken the example of a mango tree to avoid all these controversies.
Finish with that. Thank you for that good question. But let me only remark that marketing is not bad. I mean, if you're doing it for branding and you're getting something out of it, what's wrong? And if you're within it, you're able to do some work which is good, excellent. I mean, let's encourage that. You see, again, corporates are but one part of the whole of the economy and the government or country that they're part of. Please don't expect them
to do the role what government is expected to do. Please don't expect them to do the role that NGOs are expected to do. But if everybody does the basic role of moving towards sustainable development, in whatever form they do it, we are all moving then in the same direction. And that's what I think governments try to do, or countries try to do, move the ships or the flotilla in the same direction. As long as it moves in the same direction, some will go slow, some will go fast, but hopefully we'll carry each other along. Thank you.
Thank you.